Good evening, traveler. Outside, it's December 2025, and I am about to tell you a story that began exactly 930 years ago, in the bitter November of 1095, on a snow-covered field near Clermont. One man raised his hand there and spoke three words that shattered the world. Deus vult. God wills it. For 4 bloody years, 100,000 people would then march on foot across half a continent, surviving desert, famine, arrows, and their own madness, to finally kiss the stones of God's tomb in Jerusalem on July 15, 1099, wading ankle-deep in blood. This story is not about beautiful stained glass and golden relics. It's about how ordinary people, peasants, knights, mothers with children, Jews, Armenians, Muslims, together achieved something utterly impossible, and something utterly monstrous. So come. The first spark has already ignited. Deus vult? Or rather, quid vult Deus vir? What did God truly want? You will find out when the last candle is snuffed. And now, we begin where it all started. The year 1095. Europe writhed in chaos. Feudal lords slaughtered each other over scraps of land, famine decimated the peasantry, and the church battled emperors for power. Into this dark world came a voice that changed everything. On the field before Clermont stood Pope Urban II, a man with eyes of fire and a voice of thunder. A former abbot of Cluny, an expert on Eastern affairs, a diplomat who dreamed of unifying a fractured Christendom. Before him gathered thousands, bishops, knights, commoners. And he spoke. Brothers, the Holy Land, where our Lord Jesus Christ walked, suffers under the yoke of the infidel. The Turks, barbarian hordes from the steppes, desecrate our sanctuaries, torture our brothers in Christ. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios cries for aid, and we, Western Christians, must answer. The crowd roared. Urban spoke of the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, where Sultan Alp Arslan crushed the army of Emperor Romanos IV. Anatolia, the empire's heart, had turned to dust. The Turks, Islamized nomads, now ruled from Baghdad to the very gates of Europe. But Urban saw more than a military threat. He saw a chance for glory, wealth, and the forgiveness of sins. Take up the cross, and all your sins shall be forgiven. Deus vult, God wills it. Thousands fell to their knees. Knights like Raymond of Toulouse, who had consulted with the Pope, swore to go. But the call found its most fervent echo among the poor. Fanatical preachers like Peter the Hermit, a small monk with the charisma of a prophet, spread the word. Peter, called the Little or the Hermit, claimed to have been tortured by Turks in Jerusalem. His sermons set peasant hearts ablaze. A land flowing with milk and honey awaits. Liberate God's tomb. People sold everything, homes, land, livestock, to take the journey. This was not an army of knights, but hordes of paupers, women, children, armed with pitchforks and faith. In April 1096, the first mob set out under Walter Sans Avoir, the penniless. Thousands of foot soldiers marched through Hungary into Byzantium within a month. But hunger drove them to pillage. In Belgrade, they clashed with locals, the first blood was spilled. Peter the Hermit led a larger rabble from the Rhineland. His followers, incited by hatred, unleashed pogroms against Jews, the murderers of Christ. In Mainz, Cologne, Prague, innocent blood flowed. First at home, then in the east, they cried. King Kalaman of Hungary scattered the German crusaders at his borders, Emicho of Leiningen fell. The survivors reached Constantinople. Emperor Alexios was horrified. He had expected mercenary knights, not a wild, desperate horde. He quickly ferried them across the Bosphorus into Asia, to the camp at Civitate near Nicomedia. "Wait here for the real army," he ordered. But it wasn't long before the French began raiding the countryside. They plundered Christians and Turks alike, pushing as far as Nicaea. The Turks under Kilij Arslan struck. In October 1096, they crushed the People's Crusade. A massacre, tens of thousands dead, children sold into slavery. Peter the Hermit survived, but his dream lay in ruins. The popular expedition had ended in blood and dust. Meanwhile, the nobility prepared. Pope Urban traveled through France, rallying support. No king joined. Henry IV was excommunicated, Philip I a bigamist, William Rufus a skeptic. But the great lords did. Hugh of Vermandois, brother of the French king, Robert of Normandy, son of the Conqueror, Robert of Flanders, Stephen of Blois, the brothers Godfrey, Baldwin, and Eustace of Bouillon, and the South Italian Normans under Bohemond of Taranto, a cunning warlord who dreamed of his own principality. In August 1096, the Lorrainers under Godfrey set out. Through Hungary, where they gave hostages, they reached Constantinople. Alexios demanded an oath, "Restore to me my lost territories." Godfrey refused, but after clashes, he relented. Taking the cross meant fealty, but the Crusaders had plans of their own. Hugh of Vermandois arrived by sea, was shipwrecked, welcomed as a prince, but closely watched. Bohemond came with his Normans, swore the oath swiftly, hoping for command. Raymond of Toulouse, wealthy and ambitious, marched through Italy and Dalmatia, his resolve tested by battles with the Slavs. By April 1097, the armies assembled near Nicomedia. Byzantine ships ferried them across. The emperor sent Tatikios and Butumites as guides. The Crusaders, 100,000 souls, stood before Turkish walls. Their first objective, Nicaea. The siege began. The Turks under Kilij Arslan attacked, but the Crusaders repelled the assault. The city surrendered to the Byzantines, a bitter disappointment for the Franks. But the road ahead lay open. At Dorylaeum, a trap awaited. Bohemond's vanguard was surrounded. Arrows flew like rain, knights fell. But then, reinforcements arrived, Godfrey, Raymond. A heavy cavalry charge shattered the Turks. Victory! Kilij Arslan fled. Anatolia was hell, a desert of hunger and disease. The Crusaders suffered, but faith drove them onward. Another victory at Heraclea. Then, across the Antitaurus, the mountains of death, where horses plunged into chasms. In October 1097, they stood before Antioch. 8 months of siege, hunger, winter, desertion. Kerboga arrived with a relief army. But Bohemond bribed a guard, a gate was opened. A massacre. The city fell, only for the Crusaders to become besieged themselves within its walls. Then, the legendary lance, a relic that ignited their fervor. In June 1098, they sallied forth and crushed Kerboga. Antioch was Bohemond's. Meanwhile, Baldwin captured Edessa, becoming its count. The first Crusader state. The march south, Tripoli, Acre. Emirs paid ransom. In June 1099, Jerusalem. After a desperate siege, the final assault, the city fell on July 15. A massacre, blood ankle-deep. Godfrey, protector of the Holy Sepulchre. A kingdom was born. Beneath the walls of Constantinople, the armies of the West assembled. Hugh of Vermandois, the noble brother of the French king, arrived first, but an Adriatic storm had taken his ships and men. Emperor Alexios welcomed him with honors, gold and silk, but under watch. Hugh swore the oath of fealty, promising to return conquered lands to Byzantium. It was only the beginning of the intrigue. Next came the Lorrainers under Godfrey of Bouillon. 3 brothers, Godfrey, Baldwin, and Eustace, led thousands of knights through Hungary. King Kalaman, traumatized by the peasant hordes, took Baldwin hostage. But Godfrey marched peacefully, without pillage. They camped near Salimbria. Alexios demanded the oath. Godfrey refused. "I am a vassal of Emperor Henry." Tension mounted. The Crusaders began to loot the suburbs. The emperor cut off their supplies. Baldwin proposed an attack on the city itself. On Maundy Thursday, they assaulted the Blacherney Gate. The Byzantinians, taken by surprise, repelled the onslaught with arrows and Greek fire. Godfrey capitulated and swore the oath. The emperor lavished gifts upon them, adopting them as his sons. Yet, distrust smoldered in their hearts. Bohemond of Taranto, the cunning Norman, arrived next. Son of Robert Guiscard, conqueror of Sicily, he dreamed of his own kingdom. His men, 500 knights, 3,500 infantry, were veterans of war with the Saracens. They crossed from Bari, sacked Castoria, and clashed with Pecheneg. Bohemond swore the oath swiftly, hoping for the title of Grand Domestic of the East. Alexios saw through him and granted him nothing. Tancred, his nephew, refused to swear altogether, crossing the Bosphorus alone. Raymond of Toulouse, the wealthy southerner, marched through Italy and Dalmatia. The journey was horrific: Slavic ambushes, starvation. At Dyrrhachium, he clashed with Byzantine guides. Adhemer of Le Puy was wounded. Raymond refused the oath if Bohemond were to be in command. He eventually relented, but the rivalry was ignited. The northern French, Robert of Normandy, Stephen of Blois, Robert of Flanders, came last. In Lucca, they met with Pope Urban, who asked for aid against the Romans. They refused. In Apulia, they embarked, but storms took their ships. In May, they too swore the oath and joined the host. The Crusaders, 100,000 souls, crossed the Bosphorus. Alexios sent Tatikios and Butumites as guides. The first objective, Nicaea, the Sultan's fortress. The siege began in May 1097. A city girded by walls and 370 towers. The Turks under Kilij Arslan attacked, but the Crusaders held. The Provençals under Raymond suffered most. Arrows flew, men fell. Victory came on June 19. The Sultan fled. The city surrendered to the Byzantines, not the Franks. Disappointment, but plunder flowed. The Crusaders marched on. They split, Bohemond ahead, Raymond behind. At Dorylaeum, the trap, Kilij Arslan, with the Danishmends, struck on July 1, arrows like rain, knights crouched behind shields. Bohemond shouted, "Hold the line!" 40 brave men charged out and fell to the last. Then, the reinforcements, Godfrey, Raymond. The heavy cavalry charge crushed the Turks. The Sultan fled, Anatolia lay open. The desert tormented them. Hunger, thirst, disease. Another battle at Heraclea, another victory. The Anti-Taurus, the mountains of death. Horses plunged into chasms, men despaired. "Why did we leave our homes?" they groaned. But faith drove them. God's tomb awaits. In October, Antioch. 8 months of siege, winter, famine, desertion. Kerboga arrived with his hordes. Bohemond bribed a tower guard, entering by night. A massacre. The city fell on June 3, 1098. But then they were besieged. Famine gnawed, the visionary Peter Bartholomew found the Holy Lance, a relic. Enthusiasm blazed. On June 28, they sallied forth and crushed Kerboga. Antioch was Bohemond's. Baldwin, meanwhile, captured Edessa. The Armenians welcomed him, had Thuras killed, and made him count. The first state. The march south, Tripoli, Acre. Emirs paid ransom. In June 1099, Jerusalem. The siege, the final assault on July 15. The walls breached, a massacre. Blood ankle-deep. Godfrey, protector of the Holy Sepulchre, refusing a crown, where Christ wore thorns, I shall not wear gold. But the war was not over. The Fatimids of Egypt marched on Ascalon. The Battle of August 12, a Crusader victory. The kingdom was born, but fragile. On July 15, 1099, its walls were breached under the relentless assault of wooden siege towers and battering rams. Godfrey of Bouillon and his Lorrainers stormed in first, followed by Tancred and the Normans. The streets transformed into rivers of gore. Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians fell beneath the Crusaders' swords. No mercy, they roared, drunk on victory after years of suffering. Blood ran ankle-deep, as the chronicler Raymond of Aguilers wrote. The Temple of Solomon, Al-Aqsa, became a slaughterhouse, the dome of the rock filled with the dead. The Fatimid governor, Iftikhar ad-Dawla, barricaded himself in the citadel but surrendered in exchange for his life. His garrison was spared, but the civilians were not. The Crusaders surged toward the Holy Sepulchre. There, in the basilica, they fell to their knees, tears mingling with blood. Deus le volt, they roared once more, this time in fervent thanks. The expedition's goal was achieved, the Holy Land liberated after 461 years of Muslim rule. But the victory had a bitter aftertaste. Adhemer of Le Puy, the papal legate, had died in Antioch. Peter the Hermit survived only as a hollow shadow. Now came the time for order. The commanders gathered in council. Who would rule? Raymond of Toulouse wanted the crown but refused it, too proud, they said. Godfrey of Bouillon, the hero of Salimbria and Dorylaeum, was elected. Yet he refused the title of king. I will not wear a crown of gold where Christ wore a crown of thorns. He became the Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, the defender of the Holy Sepulchre. He took control of the citadel and divided the city among his knights. Baldwin of Boulogne remained in Edessa, Bohemond in Antioch. The first Crusader states were born, ignoring the oaths sworn to Alexios. But the threat was not over. The Fatimid vizier, Al-Afdal of Egypt, marched on Ascalon with 20,000 men. The Crusaders, only 10,000 strong but fortified by faith, set out on August 12. Under cover of night, they crept through the desert, surprising the enemy by the river. God wills it, they bellowed as they charged. The Saracens fled in panic, their camp was overrun. Al-Afdal lost 10,000 men, the Crusaders, only 200. Ascalon surrendered, but Raymond's jealousy of Godfrey prevented its capture. The city remained Muslim, a thorn in the kingdom's side. Many now turned homeward. Robert of Normandy, Stephen of Blois, Hugh of Vermandois, returning with loot and glory. On their way, they encountered Byzantine troops who had exploited the chaos to recapture Nicaea. Alexios was satisfied, but the Franks branded him a traitor. Tancred and Bohemond expanded their territories, fighting Turks and Armenians alike. The Kingdom of Jerusalem took shape. Godfrey ruled for only a year. He died of fever in July 1100. Baldwin left Edessa, came to Jerusalem, and was crowned king on Christmas Day. He founded the Great Orders, the Hospitallers for the sick, the Templars to protect pilgrims. The states, Antioch under Bohemond, Edessa under Baldwin II, Tripoli under Raymond's son, Bertrand. These feudal fiefdoms mirrored the Western model, anchored by mighty castles like the Crac de Chevaliers. The Crusade changed the world. Europe discovered the East, its spices, silks, and knowledge. The Muslim world awoke to jihad, though at first they underestimated the Franks. Byzantium gained time, but the loss of trust paved the way for the Fourth Crusade. For the Crusaders, it was a miracle. Of 100,000 who set out, only 20,000 survived, yet they founded Outremer, the lands beyond the sea. But peace was fragile. The Turks attacked, Emirs schemed. Godfrey's tomb in the basilica symbolized a dream that had turned into an endless war. Deus Revolt? Yes. But at what price? April 1097. 100,000 souls stand on the Asian shore of the Bosphorus. The air smells of salt, horse sweat, and fear. Alexios has ferried them all across, Lorrainers, Normans, Provençals, Northern French, and now he stares from his walls, praying these wild Franks will not return as his enemies. First objective, Nicaea, the capital of Seljuk Sultan Kilij Arslan. Walls like dragon's teeth, 370 towers, a lake on one side, mountains on the other. The Crusaders arrived in May and immediately began building siege towers. Raymond of Toulouse dug trenches, Bohemond guarded the supply lines, Godfrey prayed. The Turks inside believed the Franks were just another band of pilgrims. They were wrong. On June 19, the Sultan tried to break the siege. His light cavalry poured from the gates like a black cloud of arrows. The Crusaders held. The Provençals bled, but they held. The city capitulated, but not to the Franks. The Byzantine admiral Bautumites raised the imperial banner. The Franks were enraged. Betrayal. Tancred screamed. Alexios merely smiled and sent gold. On July 1, 1097, they marched deeper into Anatolia. They split into two columns, Bohemond and the Normans in front, Raymond and Godfrey behind. At Dorylaeum, an ambush awaited. On the morning of July 1, a rain of arrows descended upon the Normans. Thousands of horsemen under Kilij Arslan and his Danish mended allies. Bohemond stood on a hill, shield held high, roaring, "Hold the line, or we are dead." Horses screamed, men fell like sheaves. A messenger arrived, "Raymond and Godfrey are 2 days away." Bohemond laughed, "Then we die gloriously." But they did not die. In the afternoon, banners bearing the cross appeared on the horizon. Godfrey's heavy cavalry, in full armor, smashed into the Turkish flanks like a hammer on an anvil. Bishop Edhemer led a charge, barefoot. The Turks broke. The Sultan fled, leaving behind his tents, his gold, his women. For the first time, the Franks truly felt that God was with them. Then came Anatolia. Hell on earth. No water, no pastures. Horses ate their own saddles, knights drank camels' blood. Women gave birth to dead children on the road. Stephen of Blois wrote to his wife, "Had I known what awaited us, I would have stayed home." But they marched on. Across the Anti-Taurus mountains, where Tancred saved Bohemond from a chasm. through Cappadocia, where the Armenians welcomed the Franks as liberators. 8 kilometers of walls, 400 towers, the river Orontes, Mount Silpius. A city conquered by Romans, Arabs, Byzantines, now, it would fall to the Franks. 8 months of hell. The winter of 1097–98 was crueler than any in Europe. The Crusaders ate boots, rats, dead horses. Stephen of Blois deserted, fled home and became the shame of knighthood. The famine was so severe that shields were sold for a single loaf of bread. Bohemond had a plan. He bribed an Armenian guard named Pyrrhus. The night of June 2nd to 3rd 1098. 60 Normans climbed a rope to the Tower of the Two Sisters. The Gate of St. George. Deus Vult, they roared and flung the gate open. A massacre. Streets ran with blood. Only the citadel held out under the Turkish commander, Yagisayan, until Bohemond killed him with his own hand. On the morning of June 4th, celebration. By the afternoon, terror. Kerboga of Mosul arrived with an army vast as the sea. Now the Crusaders were besieged inside the city they had just taken. Famine returned with double fury. Men died by the hundreds. And then, a miracle occurred. A Provençal peasant named Peter Bartholomew claimed Christ had shown him where the Holy Lance lay, the very spear that pierced Jesus' side. They dug beneath the Cathedral of St. Peter. They found a rusted piece of iron. Half the army believed, the other half scoffed. But when they marched out on June 28, barefoot, in penitent shirts, with the lance held high, something happened. Kerboga's army broke. The Franks charged and shattered them to pieces. Antioch was theirs. Bohemond declared himself prince. Raymond raged. Alexios, who had promised aid, never arrived. Betrayal, the Franks whispered. And so, the seed of hatred between West and Byzantium was planted deep. Now, only Jerusalem remained. But between it and the Crusaders lay all of Syria, hunger, disease, and time. Summer 1099. Jerusalem. After the massacre, the Crusaders awoke in a city of ghosts. The streets smelled of blood and incense. Godfrey of Bouillon stood barefoot in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in a simple tunic, weeping like a child. Beside him knelt Tancred, whose sword still smoked from the previous day's butchery. Raymond of Toulouse prayed at the Dome of the Rock, where just yesterday piles of the dead had lain. They all knew, they had reached their goal. But what now? On August 12 came the last great battle of the First Crusade. The Fatimid vizier, Al-Afdal, marched from Egypt with an army meant to sweep the Franks into the sea. The Crusaders had only 1,200 knights and 9,000 infantry, but they were the ones who had survived Dorylaeum, Antioch, the desert, and famine. They caught the Egyptians at dawn near Ascalon. The Crusaders attacked as one man. Godfrey led the center, Robert of Normandy the left, Raymond the right. The Egyptian cavalry shattered against Frankish lances like waves against a cliff. By noon, it was over. Al-Afdal fled on a camel, leaving behind tents full of gold, slave girls, and sacred Qurans. The Crusaders even found the true cross, a relic they believed to be a piece of Christ's cross. That day, a legend was born. Now, there was nothing left to conquer. Only to survive and rule. Godfrey died exactly 1 year later, in July 1100. It was said he ate a poison apple from an Arab physician. On his deathbed, he refused a crown. I will not be king where Christ was crowned with thorns. His brother Baldwin left Edessa, came to Jerusalem, and on Christmas Day, 1100, was crowned in Bethlehem as Baldwin I, the first king of Jerusalem. Patriarch Daimbert placed the crown on a head that would never again remove its helmet. Bohemond of Taranto ruled as Prince of Antioch, but in 1100 he was captured by the Danish Mendids. Tancred assumed the regency and expanded the principality to the Euphrates. When Bohemond was ransomed in 1103, he sailed to Italy, raised a new army, but never returned to the Holy Land. He died in Apulia in 1111, leaving behind only the reputation of the greatest warrior of his age. Raymond of Toulouse founded the county of Tripoli but died in 1105 from wounds sustained during a siege. His son Bertrand finished his work. Edessa passed from Baldwin I to his cousin, Baldwin of Bourg, later Baldwin II. Of the original 100,000 pilgrims and warriors, barely 20,000 remained in Outremer. But those who survived became the lords of a new world. They founded the great orders, the Hospitallers, who healed, and the Templars, who killed for Christ. They built castles whose ruins still stand, Croix de Chevaliers, Margate, Belvoir. They traded with Genoese, Pisan, and Venetian merchants. They wore silk, ate dates and spices, spoke Arabic and French. From wild nights, they became the lords of the Orient. And yet, it all began with a single cry on the field of Clermont, Deus le Volt. In 4 years, from the autumn of 1095 to the summer of 1099, they changed the face of the world. Europe learned to dream of the East. Muslims learned to hate the Franks. Byzantium learned to fear both. And in the desert between Acre and Jerusalem, a kingdom was born that would last for nearly 200 years, fragile, bloody, magnificent. The last veterans of the First Crusade returned home in the years 1100 to 1101. They carried with them fragments of the true cross, rings from Antioch, silks from Tripoli. When they told their tales by Norman or Provençal hearths, children listened open-mouthed, and men secretly envied them. And when asked, was it worth it? They always answered the same: we saw God's tomb. And God gave us victory. For that, we would go again, even if we knew we would die on the way. Thus ended the First Crusade, not as a political expedition, but as the greatest pilgrimage the world had ever seen. And a legend was born that will never die. While Europe sang ballads of Jerusalem, in the desert between Acre and Gaza lived men who would never see their castles again. The First Crusade was not just a campaign, it was a fate. Godfrey of Bouillon, the man who refused a crown from the patriarch's hands because Christ wore only thorns, died on July 18, 1100. He was 40. Some said he was poisoned in Caesarea after accepting an apple from an Arab emir. Others claimed it was a fever after the Battle of Arsuf. He lay in agony for 3 days, still in the chainmail he had worn since Dorylaeum. His last words were said to be, "Now I understand why God willed us to go." They buried him in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right beside the entrance. His sword lies there to this day, an empty tomb, for his body vanished during Saladin's conquest. Baldwin I, his brother, became king. He was crowned on Christmas Day, 1100, in Bethlehem. He was a different man than Godfrey, hard, pragmatic, ruthless. He married the Armenian princess Arda, but when he needed money, he had the marriage annulled and wed a wealthy Sicilian widow. He captured Acre, 1104, Beirut, 1110, and Sidon. Dying in 1118 from a fishbone in Egypt, he had himself carried on a litter all the way to Jerusalem to die beneath the walls he loved. His final command: bury me beside my brother. Let us keep watch over God's tomb. Bohemond of Taranto never became what he wished to be, Emperor of the East. After his capture by the Danish Mendids, 1100 to 1103, he was ransomed for 100,000 bezants and sailed to Italy. There, he raised a new army and in 1107 attacked Byzantium, and Alexios himself. He lost at Dyrrhachium, forced to kneel before the emperor and swear fealty as a vassal. He died in Apulia in 1111, a broken man. His giant frame was buried in Canossa, in a mausoleum inscribed, "Here lies Bohemond, the terror of the Turks and the shame of the Greeks." Tancred, his nephew, remained in the Orient until his death. He became regent of Antioch, then of Edessa. They called him the greatest Norman since Roland. Dying in 1112, he is said to have whispered, "If I had another life, I would go again." His tomb lies in Antioch, beneath the cathedral floor, undiscovered until the 20th century, the skeleton of a giant, a sword in its grasp. Raymond of St. Gilles, Count of Toulouse, never saw Jerusalem from within. He remained before Tripoli, where in 1105 an arrow struck his eye during the siege. He died over 3 days, still in the saddle until he fell. His son Bertrand completed the city's conquest and founded the county of Tripoli. Raymond's sword still hangs in Toulouse as a relic. Robert of Normandy, son of William the Conqueror, returned home a hero. But in England, his brother Henry I awaited, imprisoning him in Cardiff for 28 years until his death. Robert spent the rest of his life in a cell, having his servant recount tales of Antioch to him. Stephen of Blois, who fled from Antioch, returned in 1101 to clear his name, and fell at Ramla. Of the great names of the First Crusade, only those who settled in the East survived. All others either died in battle or returned as shadows. And then there were the nameless, thousands of knights who became lords of castles in Galilee, foot soldiers who married Armenian women and sired a new race, the Polanes, children of the cross. They spoke French with an Arabic lilt, wore a turban beneath their helmet, and drank wine from cups made from a skull. When the last veteran of the First Crusade died in 1119, a certain Anselm of Rhineland, it is said that on the night before his death, he rose from his bed, put on his old crusader's tunic, and roared into the darkness, "Deus le volt." Then he fell dead. Thus ended the generation that walked on foot across half the world to kiss the stones of God's tomb. They did not return. They remained there, in the dust of the walls, in the bones beneath Antioch, in the stone of Jerusalem. And if you walk the Via Dolorosa today and feel the wind from the sea, sometimes you might hear in the distance the roar of 10,000 throats. God wills it. It is only the wind. Or is it? Not all had names like Godfrey or Bohemond. Most had no coat of arms. There was, for example, Gautier sans avoir, the penniless. A poor knight from near Paris who led the first wave of the poor in April 1096. He had but 1 horse, 1 suit of armor, and 50 men. When they reached Belgrade, starving, they began to loot. The Byzantines let them pass but warned, "Beyond the river, the Turks await." Gautier smiled, "If God wills it, we will pass through hell itself." Pass they did. On October 21, 1096, they stood at Civitate. The Turks attacked by night. Gautier fought to his last breath. They found him in the morning with 20 arrows in his body, still standing, leaning on his shield. No one knows where he is buried. Only the chronicler Albert of Aix wrote, "He was the first to take the cross, and the first to die for it." Then there was Reynold Porchet, a Norman sergeant in Tancred's company. During the siege of Antioch, he was captured by the Turks. They offered him, "Convert to Islam, or die." Rhineland laughed. "I've already converted to the cross." They threw him from the walls. His body landed right before Tancred's tent. The Normans buried him beneath the ramparts and carved on a stone, "Here lies Rhineland, who did not flinch." Or the woman, her name was Emma. She was a widow from Lorraine who marched with Godfrey's army as a laundress. When water ran out in Anatolia, she slit her own veins and gave her blood to her young son to drink. She died at Heraclea. Her son survived and became a Templar. To this day, a charter in the Jerusalem archives reads, "Brother Guillaume, son of Emma the laundress, donates a field near Nablus to the monastery, in eternal memory of his mother." And there was a Jew from Mainz, his name was Kalonimos. When Count Emicho's crusaders stormed the Jewish quarter in May 1096, he hid with his family in the synagogue. The crusaders set the doors ablaze. Kalonimos embraced his wife and 2 daughters and said, "God is one." All 4 perished in the flames. A century later, Jewish chroniclers wrote, "Their blood cries out to heaven as does the blood of Jerusalem." Or the Armenian Christian, Miran of Edessa. When Baldwin was conquering the city, Miran opened the gate and handed over the keys. Baldwin made him market overseer. Miran married a Frankish woman, they had 7 children, and all spoke 3 languages. When Edessa fell to Zengi in 1144, Miran's last grandson fought on the ramparts with a cross on his chest and an Armenian inscription on his shield, "For Christ and for Armenia." Or the little Arab boy from Antioch, who was 8 years old in 1098. When the Normans stormed the city, he hid in a well. Tancred's men pulled him out, gave him bread, and named him Jean. He grew up as a squire, became a knight, and fell in 1119 at Hap. His tombstone reads, "Jean d'Antioche, son of no one, brother to all." Or the German monk Fulcher of Chartres, who did not fight, only wrote. He walked the entire way, carrying his chronicle in a leather satchel. Dying in Jerusalem in 1127, he had the window open to see the Temple Mount one last time. His final sentence was, "Now I know why we went." Thousands of such stories vanished into the dust. No chronicler wrote them down. But they are etched into the stone of the walls, the bones beneath Antioch, the wind that blows between Acre and Jerusalem. The First Crusade was not just about kings and princes. It was about people who sold their last cow to go. About mothers who buried their children in the Anatolian desert. About children born under the cross and dying under the crescent. About loves that lasted a single night between 2 battles. And when you walk the alleys of old Jerusalem today and catch the scent of incense and blood that has lingered for 1,000 years, remember them. Not Godfrey. The nameless ones. They paid for it all. The First Crusade was not just heroism and miracles. It was also the hell it created. May 1096, the Rhineland. Count Emicho of Leiningen's mob of crusaders, not knights, but peasant rabble with pitchforks and crosses on their chests, stormed the Jewish quarter of Mainz. They chanted, "First, the murderers of Christ at home." Rabbi Kalonimos stood before the synagogue and pleaded, "We too are children of Abraham." The answer was fire. 1,000 souls burned alive. In Worms, Jews killed themselves to avoid the Crusaders' hands, mothers slit their children's throats, then their own. In Cologne, Speyer, Prague, the same. 10,000 dead. Pope Urban later condemned it, but words could not bring back the blood. To this day, they say on the anniversary, you can hear weeping in the Rhineland synagogues. October 1096, Civitate near Nicomedia. After the massacre of the People's Crusade, tens of thousands of bodies littered the field. The Turks sold children in the markets of Iconium for a few silver coins. The Byzantine emperor sent ships to bury what remained. They found a little girl, 8 years old, nailed to a cross made of her own mother's dress. Alexios ordered even these infidel Christians buried, but the place was said to be haunted at night. To this day, it is called the Field of Bones. December 1098, Meyer et al. Newman. After capturing the city between Antioch and Tripoli, the Crusaders were driven mad by famine. The chronicler Radulf of Caen wrote, "Our people boiled adult Saracens in cauldrons and impaled children on spits like lambs." Bohemond and Raymond argued over control of the city while their men ate the dead. When word reached Europe, the Church denied it. But the Arabs remember it to this day. July 15, 1099, Jerusalem. The day the walls fell. The Crusaders poured in, and madness began. First the Muslims, men, women, children. Then the Jews in the synagogue. The rabbi locked the doors and set it ablaze so they would not fall into Frankish hands. Finally, even Eastern Christians, because they had the wrong cross. Blood flowed down the steps of the Temple Mount into the Kidron Valley. One chronicler wrote, "If you were not there, you would not believe how much blood flowed." Another added, "Ankle deep, up to the horses' bridles." Tancred promised protection to the people in Al-Aqsa, but his men slaughtered them anyway. When Godfrey entered the Holy Sepulchre the next day, he waded through blood up to his shins. August 12, 1099, Ascalon. The last battle of the First Crusade. The Egyptian army fled, abandoning a camp full of women and children. The Crusaders slaughtered everyone. They found a 5-year-old boy hiding in a barrel of honey. They pulled him out and said, "You will be a Christian." They named him William of Tyre, and he grew up to be the greatest chronicler of Outremer, the one who would later write, "Our fathers were heroes. But they were also beasts." And then, the quiet massacres. Armenian villages plundered because they looked like Turks. Greek monasteries in Anatolia where monks had their throats slit for refusing to swear allegiance to the Franks. Frankish women who marched with the crusade and were raped by their own because when there is nothing to eat, all flesh is meat. When the first veterans returned to Europe, they spoke only of miracles, the Holy Lance, the victories, God's tomb. Of the massacres, they were silent. But at night, they awoke screaming. Robert of Normandy, in his Cardiff cell, would roar, "Blood! Blood up to the knees!" until his dying day. Today, when you walk through Old Jerusalem and feel something metallic beneath the paving stones, it is not a coin. It is blood that has not dried in 900 years. Because some things, God did not will. In the summer of 1099, as the last Crusaders kissed the stones of God's tomb and wiped the blood from their hands, they thought they had won. But in truth, they had only just begun to lose. Outremer, the land beyond the sea, was born of blood and dreams. 4 states. The Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Principality of Antioch. The County of Tripoli. The County of Edessa. On paper, it looked like a new Europe in the East. In reality, it was a 1,200-kilometer-long coastline dotted with lonely castles, where 5,000 Frankish knights ruled over 500,000 Muslims, Jews, Armenians, and Greek Christians. The first generation lived in a dream. They wore silks, bathed in hammams, ate sherbet, and drank wine from golden-laid cups. Their children, the Polanes, spoke Arabic better than French. In Acre, tournaments were held where knights fought in Turkish garb, the prize a slave girl from Georgia. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The Muslims awakened. What they had considered another Frankish raid proved to be a permanent occupation. In 1144, Edessa fell to Atabeg Zengi. For the first time, a word that would change history was spoken: jihad. The Second Crusade failed. And then came Saladin. Byzantium never forgave. Alexios died in 1118 feeling betrayed. His son John II and grandson Manuel I sought to either subdue or destroy the Franks. In 1182, the Greeks of Constantinople expelled all Latins, 60,000 dead in a single night. 20 years later came the revenge. The Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople. The seed planted in 1097 had borne bitter fruit. Europe changed, too. When the first veterans returned, they brought not only relics but a taste for spices, sugar, and silk. Trade routes shifted from Persia to the Mediterranean. Genoa, Pisa, and Venice grew rich. And with trade came knowledge, Arabic numerals, medicine, philosophy. What began as a holy war inadvertently opened Europe's eyes. But its greatest legacy was invisible. Every castle in the Levant, every church in Provence, every troubadour's song bears the mark of the First Crusade. The crusade became a symbol that outlived all defeats. Even when the last stronghold of Acre fell in 1291 and the last Templar leaped from the walls into the sea, the Crusaders' cross endured. On coats of arms. On flags. In the street names of Lisbon, Palermo, and Toulouse. And above all, in memory. Today, you stand in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount and see Muslims praying at Al-Aqsa, Jews at the Western Wall, and Christians in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All three pray to the same God. And all three have blood on their hands from the year 1099. The First Crusade did not end in victory or defeat. It ended with a question humanity has asked for 900 years. Can faith justify anything? The answer is, no. But people still seek that justification. And they always will. July 15, 2025. Exactly 926 years since the capture of Jerusalem. On the Via Dolorosa, a group of pilgrims walks, Germans, French, Americans. They carry a wooden cross. They sing in Latin. At the 9th station, an old man from Normandy stops, kneels, and kisses the pavement. He is 92 years old. His name is Jean de Saint Gilles. His many times great-grandfather was at Antioch. He carries a piece of cloth with him, a red cross on a white field, embroidered by a woman who died in the Anatolian desert in 1097. In Antioch, the ruins of the Cathedral of St. Peter stand. Beneath the floor lies the skeleton of a giant with a sword in his hands. Archaeologists found it in 1934. On his belt was carved, Tancredus Rex. In Mainz, there is a small synagogue. On the wall hangs a plaque, in memory of the 1,000 souls who burned here in May 1096, because of a madness that began with the words Deus Levolt. In Clermont, there is a statue of Urban II. His hand is raised as if still preaching. Every year on November 27th, someone lays flowers there. And every year, someone else defaces the statue with red paint. And in Jerusalem, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there is a small chapel. Inside, an empty tomb. Above it, an inscription in Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew. Here lay Godfrey of Bouillon, who refused to be king where Christ suffered. May his soul find the peace his sword never did. Every Friday at noon, a Franciscan prays in the chapel. And every Friday, an old Arab man arrives, sits opposite him, and quietly recites Surah al-Fatiha. They sit for an hour. They never speak. They just sit. Because they know what we often forget. The cross that blazed to life on the field of Clermont in 1095 is still burning. In hearts. In hatred. In hope. And it will burn as long as there exists a person who believes that God wills them to kill. Or until there exists a person who understands that God wills only one thing. That we stop. Deus vult? No. Deus caritas est. God is love. And that is the hardest command humanity has ever received.